Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Oh, thank you, Agatha. You fed me heartily today. The mushroom cream soup was especially wonderful. Give my personal thanks to your chef. You're welcome, Vanessa. With a smile, said the girl, taking the bill from the businesswoman. We are always glad to see you in our cafe. Have a nice day. The tall lady in the expensive business suit nodded and walked out the door, and Agatha, in turn, hurried to take the money to the cash register. Before doing so, she cautiously glanced into the folder and found a generous tip there. Thank you, Vanessa, thought to herself, and mentally already imagined how she could put the money aside to pay for her small, but so cozy apartment located in a remote area of Los Angeles. After that, the young waitress tightened the knot on her dark burgundy apron and continued, like a bee, to hover in the hall and serve the customers who were rushing to them for a business lunch. It was noon, which meant that most of the employees from the local business center were just about to have lunch. At this time, their cafe was usually packed to capacity. Agatha was 22 years old and had lived in Los Angeles all her adult life, although her mother told her that she herself had once lived in a small village in Arizona. Now the girl was an orphan. Her only loved one, her mother, had died many years before of a heart attack. The girl, at the time, was only 16, and she took her mother's death very hard. It took many weeks before Agatha could finally pull herself together and get on with her life, climbing out of the sticky pool of soul-consuming depression and melancholy. The only memory she had of her mother was a tiny photograph, which Agatha placed in a small, elegant heart-shaped pendant. She wore this pendant as a talisman and never took it off. In the most difficult moments, when she had a difficult decision to make, or when she was faced with a difficult choice, Agatha always turned for advice and support to the spirit of her mother, with whom she communicated through a small silver ornament. She believed that Maria, that was her mother's name, heard her and watched over her beloved daughter from heaven. Agatha loved Los Angeles, with its bright colors and dynamic pace of life, although living here alone was not easy at all. She left school and immediately went to a culinary school, where she dreamed she would one day become a chef herself and cook the best food in the area, so that even visiting celebrities would not be ashamed to serve it to them. However, Agatha's dreams were not going to come true right away. No one here wanted to hire a cook without any experience. All they could offer a girl was a dishwasher, or at best, a waitress. And of two evils, Agatha chose the lesser one, deciding that being a waitress was better and more lucrative than being a dishwasher, forced to clean up piles of dirty dishes after guests almost all day long. Okay, Agatha thought, I'll work this way for a while, gain some experience, see how things work from the inside, in the restaurant kitchen, and then I'll see what happens. Over time, she became so used to the lightning-fast pace of her new job that she almost forgot that this was not what she originally wanted. However, this job brought her good money, and eventually the young waitress managed to rent quite a decent place to live compared to where she had lived before. In all this, Agatha remained a simple and friendly girl who always smiled at the sight of the cafe guests, gladly interacted with her colleagues, and generally tried to keep a positive attitude in any situation. She caused only bright and warm feelings in other people. She dressed simply and modestly, but always in clean and ideally ironed clothes, and her attentive light gray eyes gave her a reputation of a good listener. She was also a very interesting conversationalist because she read a lot. Agatha enjoyed keeping up with all kinds of conversations and keeping up with everything that was going on in the big world around her. Like a sponge, she absorbed all kinds of knowledge and facts, not forgetting, however, in her spare time, to master new original recipes in her little home kitchen. Agatha had been working at Silver Premium Cafe for almost 2 years. Before that, she had tried her hand as a waitress at several other, smaller establishments, but it was at Carp that she found a perfect match in terms of hours, pay, and a good, friendly staff. In addition, It was here that Agatha met her happiness in the person of Anthony, a guy from a wealthy family who fell so much in love with her that he proposed to her just a few months after meeting her. Now Agatha was officially his bride, and what was most joyous and exciting for her was that she was expecting his child. It was still only a couple of months away, so the young people wanted to get married as soon as possible. Agatha wanted to look her best in her wedding gown, so she wouldn't have to adjust it to fit her figure, which had changed during the pregnancy. Who would have thought it would work out? The girl sometimes reflected to herself. We met back then, just by chance. Agatha remembered the day when a quiet, brooding-looking young man, with beautiful brown curls and a large dictionary-like book in his hands, had walked into their cafe. Anthony then ordered only coffee and a chicken salad sandwich. The young waitress was just hurrying to take his order when, ironically, a glass of juice fell to the floor from one of the neighboring tables. Even her rubber-soled shoes couldn't save her from the fatal pirouette, which the girl did when she slipped on the sweet liquid. Oh, Agatha exhaled as she saw the cup of coffee tip over, right into the glossy hair of the young man reading. Anthony cried out loudly, more out of surprise than pain. But the fragrant liquid completely flooded his well-groomed hair, and now flowed down his indignant face in large coffee milk droplets. What's that supposed to mean? He started to gasp in indignation, but immediately shut up when he saw the bewildered waitress in front of him. "Forgive me, please," Agatha sobbed, seriously frightened. "I'll get you some napkins right away. Coffee and a sandwich are, of course, on the house." The young guest's face softened. He looked the girl standing in front of him from head to toe, and then said, while trying to wipe the remains of the thick liquid from his face, "Come on, calm down. Nothing terrible has happened. I'm a slacker myself. You have to take your head out of your reading once in a while." Agatha cast a brief glance at his book, which was a thick economics textbook, and she quickly concluded that he was probably a student. "Wipes, you need them after all. I'll be right back," Agatha assured him, and dashed off to the back room. When she returned to the table a few minutes later, the guy was gone. But on the smooth, polished wooden surface, there was money and a small piece of paper. Confused, she reached out and took a few bills and a note with just 2 words. "I'll come back later. Anthony." Agatha was surprised and intrigued, and for the rest of the day she couldn't get the mysterious young visitor out of her mind. In the evening, Anthony did pick up Agatha. He apologized to her for not being able to stay then. However, according to the boy, he was just about to start another class, so he hurried back to the university. The young people got to know each other better, and as it turned out, they had much more in common than it might seem at first glance. Anthony, just like the girl, just loved to read, especially detectives. Whatever book Agatha named, it immediately turned out that her new acquaintance had already read it, and could formulate a coherent opinion about its plot and main characters. The sympathy between them broke out at once. At first, the guy picked up the waitress after his shift and drove her home. And in his free time from work in the cafe and studies, they walked in the park or went to the movies. For the first time in her life, Agatha was glad that she had a real admirer. Before, she did not take seriously the few advances of her classmates, and then her classmates at the technical school. With Anthony, it was different. The girl felt like a beautiful and delicate flower of love was blooming inside her, its petals becoming denser every day, and reaching out to exactly the same flower that blossomed in her lover's heart. After 5 months of a tender and stormy relationship, Anthony, one evening, took his beloved to a very expensive and luxurious restaurant. There, embarrassed and blushing, he took a small blue velvet box out of his pocket. Agatha's heart raced as she took that box in her trembling fingers. "Is it really?" She couldn't finish the sentence and covered her mouth with her palm, feeling like she was about to cry. "Just open it," Anthony asked, seemingly ready to jump up and down and drag Agatha with him. The girl slowly and very carefully pressed the latch and opened the dainty case. There, on a tiny satin cushion, lay a gold ring with a large drop-shaped diamond. The stone was braided like a drop of dew with the finest gold stems. It looked absolutely divine. "God, it's beautiful," Agatha whispered, stammering with emotion. "Do you like it?" Anthony asked with hope in his voice. "No," he said hurriedly. "That's not at all what I wanted to ask you. Agatha, will you marry me?" Agatha could feel the tears of happiness welling up in her eyes. Joy filled her heart, for she was now fully convinced that her fiancé loved her as much as she loved him. The girl put her arms around Anthony's neck, kissed him gently, and then asked playfully, "And you, yourself, what do you think? Should I think about it, or should I say yes right away?" Agatha took advantage of the boy's momentary confusion, laughed happily, and lightly touched the tip of his nose, saying, "My love, well, of course I agree. Yes, yes, yes." Anthony hugged his bride happily, and they continued to enjoy their evening together. A week after the engagement, Agatha realized she was pregnant. At first, she was very afraid to admit it to her fiancé, very worried about it, but one way or another, she would still have to tell Anthony about the baby, especially since they were still to have dinner with his parents. The young man couldn't wait to introduce his fiancée to them. Fortunately for the girl, the groom was excited about the impending addition to their young family, which he hurried to tell his father and mother. Agatha dissuaded him, believing that he should first wait for dinner, and if he was so impatient, announce it there. But the boy stubbornly stood his ground. From that moment on, the young waitress's life rapidly began to turn into a living hell. Elizabeth and Kevin were literally shocked to see their future daughter-in-law. This was one thing the groom's mother had not expected. This willful, demanding, and incredibly capricious woman immediately disliked the girls as soon as she saw her at the first family dinner together. "Agatha, do you always dress so simply? Is it some kind of deliberate carelessness indicative of specific taste, or a deliberate strategy in your style? Maybe these things actually belong to some little-known but niche, that is, especially expensive brands that not everyone can afford." Elizabeth looked at the girl with a look full of snake venom. Agatha knew then at once that it would not be easy for her with her future mother-in-law. "No, not at all." The waitress smiled as friendly as possible, trying not to give away the terrible anxiety she felt in the presence of the groom's mother. "I just don't think it makes sense to spend a lot of money on casual clothes. Brands, after all, deliberately inflate the price, in many ways, also for the famous name written on the label. But why is that, if this very label we still tear off before we put on this or that dress? Besides, a lot of good and practical things can be found in ordinary stores." Agatha didn't want to confront Elizabeth openly, because she knew it wouldn't end well for her anyway. There was no point in proving anything to someone who had already decided everything for herself beforehand. And the future mother-in-law, it seems, had already come to unambiguous conclusions about the girl. "Practical, yes," hissed Anthony's mother through gritted teeth. "Well, that explains a lot. Didn't you say that your mother came from the countryside?" "Mom," Anthony involuntarily exclaimed, choking on a piece of roast duck. "What did I say?" The mother looked at her son with indignation. A man should not be ashamed of his origins, especially when he wants to enter such a respected family as ours. "Isn't that right, my dear?" She turned to her husband. "It's better to put all the cards on the table right away, so that we don't wonder why our breed can suddenly have some foreign admixtures." The last phrase, the woman said with a clear hint of her son's fiancé. At that point, Anthony had already informed them of her beloved's pregnancy. Agatha flashed, but restrained herself by clutching a corner of the starched tablecloth under her chair. "And I'm not ashamed of anything, Elizabeth," Agatha answered her calmly. "People live in the countryside too, and work just as hard, by the way, and sometimes much harder than the city." "Lisa, really, what kind of fly bit you today?" Kevin muttered in a friendly way. "Agatha's right. I'm also against women spending too much money on clothes. No, I understand. The boots there, the fur coat once every 5 years. The wife rewarded the businessman with such a look that he preferred not to continue the subject. Anthony's father, of course, was not particularly fond of his daughter-in-law either, but he tried to keep his emotions and discontent under control. After all, his son had to live with this simpleton, not them. Besides, Kevin knew his wife's flammable temper more than anyone else, and therefore, over the years, he had become quite accustomed to it. The man preferred to watch the battles unfolding in front of him, as if from the sidelines, with a slight irony and faint composure. Well, ahem, the father coughed, and then decided to turn the conversation in a different direction. Let's talk about the upcoming wedding. When do you plan to get married? Well, Anthony looked at his lover uncertainly. Agatha wants to have the ceremony quickly because of the baby. We're going to go get the application this week. So we were planning to have the ceremony in about a month and a half. Elizabeth, who was slicing the tomato on her plate into thin slices, rattled her cutlery with a loud metallic clang. A malevolent smirk played on her lips. Who would doubt it? You betcha. She said so quietly that only her husband could hear her. He looked sadly at his wife, sighed, and silently turned his gaze from his son to his daughter-in-law and back. A word of warning: the bride's dress and hairstyle, as well as the general image, will be handled exclusively by me. Elizabeth said aloud, "We don't want our wedding guests to guess which area the future wife of our beloved son came from." Agatha's insides felt like they were on fire. She couldn't even breathe, let alone eat anything on the plate in front of her. More than anything, she wanted to fall into the ground, or be somewhere 1,000 miles away, preferably with Anthony. The thought of having to live under the same roof with this sarcastic woman made the girl fearful. "Okay, thank you, Mammy," Anthony responded cheerfully. He didn't seem to notice the blatant sarcasm and humiliation of his fiancée. "Agatha will only be glad to have your help. Everyone in our circle knows that you have the most exquisite and refined taste. Won't you, Agatha, accept my mother's help with the wedding?" She looked into the eyes of Anthony's mother and realized that she would do everything in her power to make preparations for the ceremony a natural nightmare for the girl. Elizabeth looked at her with the greed of a boa constrictor, before whom her daughter-in-law was but a helpless and defenseless rabbit. Gladly, the young waitress was the only thing she could squeeze out, and at the same time, she painted the sweetest smile on her face. The rest of the evening passed in the same tension, and the mother-in-law's constant attempts to hurt poor Agatha. She was resolutely confused as to why she could so much displease her future in-laws. Was it just because she was from the countryside? But what wounded the girl even more was the almost zero reaction to all the mockery of her fiancé. It was as if Anthony was under the constant influence of his parents, afraid to say a word against their will. How was that possible? When he was alone with Agatha, he was a completely different person. Self-sufficient, confident, and definitely would not run at the first call of his overbearing mother. What if Agatha was wrong, and it was true? What if the guy's behavior was just a cover, a bravado designed to win her heart? But the girl felt that her fiancé loved her, and so she hoped that he would still have the courage to talk to his parents, explaining to them that you can't do that too. Without 5 minutes, your own people. As soon as the young men left, the following conversation occurred between the spouses in the house. "No, Kevin, did you see? Did you see what he brought home? It's a mongrel mutt. A pauper, in fact. Oh, still, marry rich. I don't understand today's youth. It's been said so many times on TV and in books. There's no happiness between partners whose union is socially unequal. No, they're still trying to get into the elite, by hook or by crook. Only the blind can't see that Agatha is a redneck, not worth the little finger of our son. She managed to get him pregnant too, the bastard. She made a move, that's for sure." Elizabeth paced the living room with her arms folded across her chest, her usual way of expressing her extreme dissatisfaction with the situation. If it hadn't been for that Agatha, my son could have proposed to Jenna by now," said Kevin, with a dreamy but slightly sad look, sitting down in a wide leather armchair and smoking an expensive Cuban cigar. "Where did she come from?" "Jenna's father is David, our longtime business partner. He had repeatedly hinted that it would be good for our families to become related, that they were the same age and of equal standing, and most importantly, that we could join our business together. That would be an absolute benefit, and that would be to everyone's advantage. But no, our Anthony had a craving for adventure. The man exhaled a perfectly even ring of smoke. Well, that's what I'm talking about." The wife continued to rage. "David has a fortune in 8 figures. 8 figures. Well, where else is our son going to find such a great bride? It's like hitting the jackpot at the casino. 1 in a million. Kevin." She suddenly addressed her husband in a commanding tone, so that he even flinched a little, which made him cough up his Cuban tobacco. "What?" Overcoming his cough, he asked his wife, and looked at her with sincere incomprehension. What? Talk to him. Seriously, talk to him." Elizabeth rolled her eyes. Sometimes she thought her husband was too slow to think, and that was why he had missed out on exactly half the money they could have now. "How do you imagine that?" He was genuinely amazed. "Well, I'm going to go over and tell him. Dear son, why don't you leave your poor, pregnant bride and marry Jenna? Her father is richer, and in fact, we need to restore the capital. Is that right?" Kevin brushed the remnants of ashes off his home jacket. "He's not going to thank you and me for this, that's for sure," he went on. "What's more, Lisa, we'd lose him altogether. You know how hot guys are at 25. God forbid, run away somewhere with this redneck. We'll neither see him nor our grandson. What do you want?" Elizabeth tapped her lip thoughtfully with a sharp fingernail with a perfect, matte, wine-colored manicure. "We don't even know if it's our grandson. What if she got pregnant by another man and decided to hang someone else's baby on our son? It's in the spirit of all those sly hicks to meet a rich guy and take him for a ride at once, to make sure he doesn't get away." Kevin shook his head negatively. "Come on, Lisa, I don't believe it. I saw the way Anthony looked at that girl, and she looked at him. They were in love, Lisa, and it was real love. Agatha would not give birth to another man's child. If you put it that way, it would not be to her advantage at all. She knows that we can do a genetic examination at any time, anyway, even without her son's knowledge." Kevin looked eloquently at his wife. Kevin was 57 years old, while his beloved wife, not long ago, had turned 54. Until recently, their family had been quite prosperous. Kevin ran a successful business. Elizabeth kept her own boutique of fashionable Italian clothing and accessories. Everything changed 2 years ago, when their financial situation sharply deteriorated. Kevin made some fatal mistakes in making some important deals, and because of that, the family promptly turned from rich businessmen to middle-class businessmen. To Kevin's credit, he never blamed anyone for his failures, knowing full well that he himself had miscalculated the possible risks of falling profits. One way or another, they no longer had so much money to afford to play on the field of more serious players, so the marriage of Anthony to the daughter of a longtime and reliable business partner just had to solve the problem of renewing the family capital. Kevin, far-sighted parents wanted to choose a rich and promising bride for their son, and Jenna was just perfect in this regard. However, these dreams were dispelled like cigar smoke when Anthony brought a poor waitress from a simple family into their home. "Well, let's see if the bride can handle my special character." Elizabeth smiled slyly at her husband. Our Anthony, after all, is very soft and suggestible. Sooner or later, he will be convinced with his own eyes that such a simple girl as this Agatha of his is not suitable for him at all. Let's hope it happens before they get married. "What about the baby, Lisa?" Kevin asked cautiously. "It's simple, dear. If the child is ours, Then she will tolerate everything and keep quiet, just to please our son. Still, she can't help but understand what a piece she has, in her own way, grabbed. And if she doesn't? The woman looked expressively at her husband. He smiled understandingly and nodded briefly to his wife. Then maybe all is not lost, and Jenna should not be discounted. The father of the family finished for his wife, and with a contented look extinguished the rest of his cigar in the ashtray. Agatha stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom of her small apartment, scrutinizing her own reflection. She was pale, and her eyes were lined with unpleasant, dark shadows, a sign of fatigue and emotional exhaustion. With an almost mechanical movement, she adjusted the translucent white veil that spread behind her back. It instantly responded to her mistress with the soft sheen of the barely visible glass beads that embroidered the light and weightless fabric. Then Agatha lowered her gaze. The wedding dress fit her perfectly, as did the pearl drop earrings and the neat tiara made of hundreds of small shimmering crystals. The belly under her dress remained as flat as it had been 3 weeks before, even though the girl was exactly 3 months pregnant. It was normal. Maria once told her daughter that her pregnancy was almost imperceptible up to the 6th month. Only then, the young mother's belly literally began to climb up her nose. But despite the beautiful dress and lavish wedding set, Agatha did not feel happy. God only knew with what incredible difficulty she managed to wrest from her future mother-in-law this particular version of the wedding gown. The last few weeks had been monstrous for our heroine. Elizabeth disliked everything about her, and no matter what the girl did to please her, everything was wrong and wrong. Her fiancé's mother didn't like the way Agatha cooked, or the way she dressed, or the way she moved at rehearsals for her and Anthony's wedding balls. Sometimes the daughter-in-law even caught herself thinking that her mother-in-law must not be happy with the way the girl breathed either. Kevin, who either agreed with his gloating wife on everything or kept silent, reproaching Agatha with his silence, saying, "Well, that's what we can do. That's our daughter-in-law." She had to tolerate all this negativity in silence, or she would make jokes, making herself look even more ignorant in their society. Anthony, of course, perceived his mother's words only in a positive context and believed that Elizabeth was thus teaching her future daughter-in-law the basics of survival in secular society. The young bridegroom practically never stood up for the girl, and if he did, at some particularly poignant moments, it was always his toxic mother who had the last word in arguments. The last scandal that they gave Agatha happened just a couple of days ago. Parents of the groom literally brought the girl to her hysterics, so that she even feared for the life of his, still very tiny child. On that day, Elizabeth and Kevin said they refused to have friends and coworkers from the bride's side of the cafe as wedding guests. Not only that, but her mother-in-law insisted that Jenna, the daughter of their longtime business partner, must be her maid of honor. This turn, of course, upset Agatha terribly, and she tried to stand up for her real friends. "I don't understand, Elizabeth, what exactly is your problem with my guests?" Agatha asked, clenching her hands into fists in despair. "These are wonderful, cultured people. I've been working side by side with them for 2 years now, and not once have I had any complaints about them, either from the customers in our cafe or from anyone else." Before answering, Anthony's mother laughed wryly. "No. Do you honestly think that I would allow my only son's wedding to be celebrated by a bunch of lowlifes? Are you out of your mind, girl? Wake up. We're going to have dozens of famous guests, many of them birds of such high flight that you can't even imagine. Their jacket cufflinks alone are worth more than your whole cafe. No, Agatha, it's out of the question. This isn't a village party where everyone gets drunk by the end of the night and starts chanting pathetic American folk songs. This is a different kind of event. By calling these people beggars, you're calling me a beggar, too. Do you understand that?" She couldn't hold back the tears that were choking her. Agatha said, "Honey, you're taking this too personally," Anthony interjected. "Mom wants what's best for her. Really well. There will really be some very influential guests there. I'm not saying your friends are bad. I'm just saying that they might be really uncomfortable being in such in the company of pompous rich people. She couldn't stand it, she said aloud. Young lady, I would ask you not to insult our loved ones. Kevin stood up for his guests. Calm down, Kevin. Elizabeth waved her hand toward her husband in a general manner. Agatha, we just cannot get over the fact that our son, in fact, pulled her out of the mud and poverty. Well, it's hard for a man to believe in his own happiness all at once. It happens. That's okay. We'll be able to re-educate her. Agatha, however, was no longer embarrassed, crying, standing in front of her rich relatives and fiancé, and feeling, at the same time, incomparably humiliated. Finally, she whispered softly toward her future mother-in-law, "You can do what you want, but I can't take it anymore." With these words, the girl ran out of the restaurant, where they were discussing the upcoming celebration, and rushed to her house. On the way, she heard Anthony call her name several times, but Agatha did not turn around. The groom, however, did not hurry to run after his beloved, reasonably believing that she must have her hormones going wild against the background of pregnancy and the upcoming wedding, and that it would be better to just give her a little time to come to her senses and cool down. And now, far from happy, the bride stood in her room and thought about whether she should, in principle, marry a man who is not only unable to protect his woman from the attacks of her relatives, but also agrees with them, making Agatha feel like a complete nobody and a sponger who is married only because she is carrying the child of their dear hair under her heart. The car was to arrive at her doorstep in half an hour, to take her first to the registry office, and then to that fancy restaurant where Elizabeth was in charge. Agatha glanced in the mirror again and saw the girl's lips quivering in her reflection. After stroking her belly and taking one long, deep breath, the girl resolutely took off her veil and tiara and threw them on the bed. Quickly changing into jeans and a comfortable shirt, Agatha put everything she needed in her suitcase and, as inconspicuously as possible, slipped out of the house, trying not to be seen by her neighbors. Half an hour later, she was already sitting on a bench near the bus station, crying bitterly. The girl had, in fact, run away from her own wedding, and though she had the fondest feelings for her fiancé, she could not accept his weakness and lack of support. This was not how Agatha planned her married life. Least of all, she wanted to become another piece of furniture in someone's lavishly furnished living room, from which she could be thrown out at any moment, as soon as such a piece of furniture bored its snooty owners. "What's wrong, honey? Why are we crying?" Suddenly someone's affectionate voice asked the girl. Agatha slowly pulled her hands away from her face and looked at the man speaking. An old woman of good looks was standing in front of her. The old woman was pulling behind her a small, but full of something in a wheeled cart. From under the motley kerchief on her head, silver white strands were protruding. "Don't get any ideas. I was just passing by to buy a bus ticket," the woman went on to say. "I see that you're not feeling well. Let me ask you something and see if I can help." "I don't know. I seem to be lost in this life," Agatha said, sobbing, wiping away her tears with her fist. "Yesterday it seemed that I still had everything ahead of me, a whole new world to open up, and today it seemed that I'd lost everything. And I ruined it with my own hands, but I couldn't do otherwise." The old woman looked at her carefully, as if she were trying to discern something special in Agatha's appearance that she herself could not see. Finally, the woman suggested, "A traveler on the road won't last long without a signpost. Why don't you come with me to the village? It won't be far, about 15 or 20 kilometers. My name is Molly." The old woman introduced herself at the same time. "I mean, what do you mean, go with you?" The girl was embarrassed. "No, I shouldn't. It's embarrassing. I'm expecting a child. Why should I embarrass you?" Molly smiled slyly. And honey, if it had embarrassed me, I wouldn't have offered it to you. I live alone, but I don't starve. I do fortune-telling and witchcraft. I can cure any ailment if I choose the right herbs. Yes, and for the predictions of people pay me well. I read accurately and always true about any person. I can tell everything except for myself and my relatives. There is only a ban on it. However, time does not make me young. I need an assistant to help make a collection, and people would write who from the local comes or from other what places pity. So I propose you. Let's go. It will not make you worse, but maybe you will find your way again. The shroud that lies over your fate will become clearer. After some thought, Agatha agreed. This action was dictated more by the hopelessness that she felt at that moment. Also, she was afraid that Anthony would find her, and then his mother would take it out on her for ruining her precious son's wedding. So Agatha moved in with Molly and began to live with her. The woman in the village had a large, good-quality house, which had 2 floors and a convenient annex. There, the village healer stored all herbs and ingredients for medicinal potions. In addition, this room was also used as a pantry. Here, on tall wooden racks, were stored all kinds of jars for the winter, dried herbs and small fish, which sometimes brought Molly village fishermen. The days were bright and benign. Agatha helped the old healer with chores, swept and washed the house, cooked. In a word, did everything to justify her stay in her house. She was still a little embarrassed that she had come to live with a stranger like that. But Molly was not too shy to let her take charge of running the house. "Will you calm down for a while, Dragonfly?" the old woman asked with a kind smile. "Think of the child. It is not good to tear yourself up so much. Dust, it's not going anywhere. You can clean it up afterwards." To this, Agatha responded with a cheerful laugh and continued cleaning. She was glad that the elderly fortune teller was treating her humanly, and so she wanted to make her life easier as it was. The girl told her about her past and how she had been abused by her fiance's rich parents. In response, the mistress said profoundly that everyone will be rewarded for his deeds, and these people will certainly be caught by the higher justice. People kept coming to Molly from different cities and distant villages, and all of them needed the help of the old visionary, who could see the future and cure almost all diseases. Gradually, the healer began to teach her skills, and Agatha, entrusting her first to mix simple potions of dried herbs, and later to prepare medicinal decoctions. One day, the girl asked to read her fortune, and Molly gladly agreed. But no matter how much the fortune teller looked at the lines on Agatha's hand, she couldn't see anything at all. "It's strange," the woman said slowly, twisting the girl's palm in front of her. "What's out there? What do you see?" The young assistant's curiosity compelled her to draw her own face closer to the mysterious drawings that stretched along her left arm. "I can't see anything. The fog is thick." The fortune teller blinked her eyes open and released Agatha's palm from her hand. "I must be very tired today. I'll take a rain check." Agatha did not pester the older woman, though she wondered what the future might hold for her. She had seen with her own eyes how Molly put almost hopeless people on their feet, and therefore, in the power of her gift, she did not doubt at all. The young girl had no idea that all the next night, the healer spent next to her bed, scrutinizing the sleeping Agatha's face. "What is wrong with you?" Molly asked herself. "Why can't you see this girl's life? Has the gift been weakened by age?" The healer sighed deeply and sadly shook her head. It was not the time for her to lose her power. Oh, not the time. One day, when Agatha was retelling the contents of the many love stories she had read while living in town, the girl mentioned that her mother had taught her to read and showed the old woman a picture of Maria. Molly was taken aback for a moment, gazing into the face of the young woman in the photo. And then she slowly asked her assistant, "Oh my God, honey, where did you get that picture?" The elderly healer's voice and hands trembled like a dry leaf in the autumn wind. Agatha was even frightened, wondering if she was getting sick. "Molly, are you not feeling well? Maybe you need a sedative tincture or stronger tea. Just say the word and I'll be off in a jiffy. Because I don't like your face at all. You look so pale." The healer, instead of answering, only clutched at the girl's hands, holding her to the wooden bench from which Agatha was so anxious to get up. Molly felt that her breathing was about to stop if she didn't hear the answer to her ultimate question. "Agatha, don't keep me in suspense. Tell me where you got that picture," almost shouted the pregnant assistant to the old lady. "That's what my mother left me, just before she died." Looking at the woman with undisguised amazement, Agatha said she didn't understand what her benefactress might have found so intriguing in the old faded photo. Nevertheless, the girl continued, not wanting to offend Molly. "My dad took this picture once with my mom's camera. My mother told me that my father was a trucker. One day his car broke down on the road, and he stopped by her village. They fell in love as soon as they saw each other. They had only one night together. The next day, my father had to return for a flight. My mother never saw him again. And 9 months later, I was born, and the only evidence that I had a mom and dad was in this little photo. That's the romance." Agatha closed the lid of the pendant with a sad smile. "It can't be," the elderly healer whispered slowly, and suddenly she rushed to the chest of drawers and pulled out an old, worn-out photo album. Cautiously sitting back down on the bench, Molly opened the album in front of the girl. "Look." With a trembling voice, she ordered the young assistant, and then she poked in turn first one photo, and then another, and a third. Now it was Agatha's turn to be astonished. From the many color and black and white photographs, her own mother was looking at her. The young girl felt the ground slipping out from under her feet. "What?" she whispered in astonishment, unable to contain the flood of emotions that had suddenly come over her. The feelings, like a raging mountain river, risked dragging her into its bottomless maelstrom. "But I couldn't even think. So my mother lived here. Did you know her, Molly?" The old healer, instead of answering, only shook her head. Every word she uttered fell like a heavy stone on Agatha's heart. "Not just knew, my girl," she whispered excitedly. "God. And I, an old fool, couldn't think of anything at once." Agatha pressed her palm to her mouth so she wouldn't cry out in emotion. She was afraid to hear the truth, but she had already guessed what the elderly healer was trying to tell her. "That's why I couldn't see anything about you, Agatha," the old woman said, with difficulty, holding back the tears that glistened in her eyes. "You are my kin by blood, my granddaughter." Agatha stared at Molly in silence for a moment, and then the realization hit her in a powerful and hot wave. "Grandma." Sobbing slowly, the girl said, "But how was it possible? How was this possible?" Shocked, Agatha could hardly imagine that the woman who had sheltered her and her unborn child was, in fact, her blood relative. And not just anyone, but her grandmother, the most related person on earth, after her mother. "Will you let me hold you?" Shyly, Agatha asked her. Molly didn't answer. She just rushed to her newfound granddaughter and squeezed her in a tight hug. "Grandma, Grandma, I can't believe how long I've dreamed of having someone else on earth, someone close to me." And then Agatha stopped being shy and cried. "My darling Agatha," she answered through her tears, "because I felt my heart of witchcraft, that not for nothing, then fate has brought me to you, as knocked something inside, that it was necessary to stop near you and to offer help. And this is it turns out, my own blood." A little later, when both women sat down at the table, Agatha still decided to make her grandmother a healing potion. The shock of the day was too much. Molly continued to tell Agatha the story of her mother. For the pregnant assistant healer, it was as if a secret door had been opened, through which Agatha could see the shadows of her own past. "Your mother, Maria, lived, once upon a time, in this very house." Wiping her tears with the sleeve of her shirt, Molly said, "I put all the pictures away on purpose, so I wouldn't waste my breath. My daughter and I had a big fight about her unplanned pregnancy. I told her that she had to study, that she had to adopt my gift of helping people, and she didn't want that. Maria wanted her usual quiet life, with a husband and a child. She said that she would go to the city to look for Vasily. That was your father's name. She gave birth to you in the city. Alas, I never saw her again. She stopped writing almost immediately. I thought she had found happiness, but it was probably just resentment, misunderstanding. If you knew, my granddaughter, how much I would have given to see your mother even for a moment, to tell Maria how much I've missed her all these years. Agatha sympathetically covered the healer's hand with hers and tried to calm her down. You don't have to kill yourself, Grandma. Mama couldn't find Daddy back then. What's true is true. The city was too big, and it's not certain he told her the truth. No matter what, I'm with you now, and I'll never leave you alone. I swear to you. Molly, who had calmed down, was awakened again. So what are we sitting around for, granddaughter? Let's go to your Anthony and his family. Let's show those scoundrels where the crayfish is. If they don't apologize to you, I'll put such a curse on them that no priest will ever be able to cleanse them. Agatha gestured to stop the older woman's determined mood. It's no use, Grandma. They don't need me, said the girl sadly. If he hasn't even called me once in all this time, it means that I've been written off for a long time. What if when we arrive, they set the guards on us? What can I say? Rich people can afford to change girls like gloves. Molly looked at her granddaughter intently, but still stepped back. It's up to you, Agatha. Don't worry too much. We lived without him, didn't we? We did. We'll live on. And no worse than they are. The goddamn rich people. And so they moved on. 6 months later, on time, Agatha gave birth to a beautiful baby boy named Herb. The boy was very much like his mother and grandmother, and Agatha was secretly glad that he did not have any traits that could remind her of her broken heart and unfulfilled hopes, which were the fault of the baby's father. Molly did not dote on her beloved great-grandson, and despite his advanced age, did not stop playing with him and telling him their local country tales. A year went by. One evening during a heavy downpour, Molly heard a quiet knock on the door. Who could that be? Asked Agatha, who was just fiddling with the little Herb on the big round crocheted rug, mother and son playing with the little fluffy kitten that had wandered into their house this summer. The old healer first frowned, then pursed her lips as if she sensed something wrong. Sit in the next room, granddaughter, she said. Don't ask anything, just go in there with Herb, and I'll get it. Agatha became worried, though she complied with her grandmother's request. Just in case, she didn't close the door tightly behind her so she could hear what was going on in the front. Molly unlocked the thick oak door, letting the drenched travelers in. They were a married couple, husband and wife, emaciated and seemingly hopeless. What? Are you here? The witch doctor asked them rudely. And I thought you would not come at all. But it seems that God's judgment has reached you too, since you have come this far on foot. All the buses were canceled, complained a man in his 60s, so we had to literally kick the dirt with our feet. Would you be so kind as to let us shelter in your barn until morning, at least? The healer was silent at first, then turned to the woman. What do you want? I see you were brought to me by misfortune. Otherwise, you would never have found your way to me. I made sure of that. She looked at the late visitor with a frown, quite unfriendly. Our son is missing, the woman said, choking on her own tears. His name is Anthony. We've been trying to find him for 3 weeks now. The police and private detectives have been involved, all to no avail. No car, no him. Help me, for God's sake. The woman sobbed, pressing a dirty handkerchief to her eyes, and her husband began stroking her shoulders, trying to calm her down. The word of mouth brought us to you. They say you can find a person by photograph, the man said, and pulled out a medium-sized photo from the inside pocket of his waterproof jacket. Here, please, take a look. Maybe he is still alive. The fortune teller reluctantly took the picture from her hands and, looking at the boy in it, whispered with frank distaste. So that's what you are, son-in-law. At that moment, the door creaked open, and Agatha came out with her son in her arms. The young mother looked at them with disdain. It was they who had lost their beloved son, Herb's father, and now, drained and completely shocked by what was happening, looked down on their failing daughter-in-law. Good evening to you, Elizabeth. You see, I'm back in my home village, just as you dreamed. The girl's eyes burned with outright hatred for the people who had essentially ruined her life. Why did you mock me while you had power? And now you come to my grandmother to ask for help, Agatha said angrily. Agatha, honey, forgive us, for Christ's sake. Elizabeth was still in her sweatpants and boots, and she fell to her knees in front of the girl. We were fools, I repent. We couldn't see our happiness in you. Then we married our son to Jenna, and she turned out to be such a bitch. That's where the snake was. But we didn't see it right away. The nurse, squinting, answered her granddaughter. This maiden, with her father, raked up the rest of their wealth, leaving them all with a naked tail. That's right, Kevin nodded, looking at the women with pity and entreaty. Anthony decided to open a construction company to somehow feed the three of us. But, well, he was in trouble. Agatha, forgive me and my negligent wife. Only you can save our Anthony. We'll do anything for you and your grandson. Forgive us old fools. Agatha, though angry at her failed relatives, was not made of stone. Besides, she had never wished Anthony dead, so she nodded to her grandmother, who, after waving her hand over the photo for a few seconds, said slowly, I see your son is alive. They are keeping him in a room, but not in a simple room, but somewhere deep underground, some kind of basement, or I can't say for sure. There's a man standing next to him, tall and curly-haired. He has a strange name, too. A strange one, not ours. Eld. Pondered what the fortune teller had said for a minute, and then Kevin's face suddenly glowed. Eldar. Exactly. He's a friend of Anthony's, and they worked together at that young firm that Anthony went to sign the contract for. And he has a bunker under his house. He bragged to us himself when he came to visit. Following this, Elizabeth cried and thanked Molly and Agatha. Thank you. Thank you. We'll go back right now and report everything to the police. You don't need to go anywhere right now. There's a lot of bad weather outside. It's dangerous. You will go in the morning. Now get undressed and let's sit down for supper. I'll heat the soup in the kettle. At least you can meet your grandson, if Agatha doesn't mind. I do not mind, replied her granddaughter in a calm but slightly distant tone. Just do not take him in your arms. He does not like when strangers try to hug him. He is not used to. I'm not a stranger, Elizabeth said with a touch of resentment in her voice. I'm his grandmother. It's too early to talk about that, Agatha reminded her. We'll see later, but in the meantime, just try to talk to him, for starters. They spent the whole evening with their grandson, and in the morning they took the first bus back to town. There they gave the police all the information they had, and operatives were immediately sent to Eldar's cottage. Everything turned out exactly as Molly saw it. The businessman decided to swindle Anthony, and having ruined him, to take over the promising firm of Anthony. However, Eldar turned out to be a coward and could not eliminate the young man personally. Instead, he locked him in a bunker under his house, where he hoped to starve him to death and then take his body out into the woods. And there to make it look as if Anthony, lost in the woods and died of natural causes, hypothermia and lack of food and water. After Eldar was arrested and Anthony returned home, the young man radically reconsidered his outlook on life. Almost dying of starvation underground, Anthony realized what a high price he had paid for his once cowardly actions. His father and mother, of course, told him that his salvation would never have happened if Agatha and her grandmother had not agreed to help. The man immediately went to the village and on his knees begged his former bride to forgive him. Not at once, but Agatha forgave him. But before that, The young businessman had to work hard to win her heart again. Previously, he had listened to his parents in everything and had never defied their will. But now he finally began to live and act on his own, which pleased Agatha and Molly, who told her granddaughter in advance that Anthony really loved her all the time, but just could not get out from under the iron heel of his parents. Now, Agatha and Anthony are married after all. They have moved back to the city, and now they are raising in their own home, living separately from Elizabeth and Kevin. However, neither they nor Molly. They do not forget, and as far as time and work allow, they visit the old healer in her village. Agatha now runs her own small family restaurant, in which she often cooks herself, and which is popular with the residents of their neighborhood. Anthony, on the other hand, was able to succeed in the construction business, so that the family had enough money again. The only thing is that the former rich people have finally lost their former arrogance, and they no longer measure the people around them by the amount of money in their bank accounts and the purity of their origins. The story with the kidnapping of their son and the unfairness to their young daughter-in-law taught them a lot.